Hello, boys and girls. Welcome to our lesson today. Today we will be reviewing fractional line plots. Fractional line plots was a topic that we discussed towards the end of Unit 5. If you remember, we completed a journal page that described fourth graders' backpack weights to the nearest quarter pound. We took a look at that set of data. We created a line plot to represent the data, and then we answered questions based on the line plot. So we are going to be doing similar things today. The first part of this lesson is going to review line plots, and then we will be completing a line plot together. Okay. So in the picture here, I have an example of a line plot. So it says scientists measured stag beetles in Europe. Here are their measurements in inches in order from smallest to largest. The line plot below shows the data. So line plots use X's to show each piece of data. So the label for the horizontal axis describes the data. So if you take a look at our horizontal axis, we are going to see that the data was being represented in inches, and it was describing the length of the stag beetles. Okay, so now the X's within the line plot are representing the number of beetles that were reported at that length. So for example, we had 2 stag beetles that were a length of 3 inches. We had 1 stag beetle that was a length of 3.5 inches. We had 3 stag beetles that were a length of 1.5 inches. The line plot shows measurement data scaled to the half inch. Okay. Another important thing to note is that line plots have titles that describe the information in the graph. So the title here would be stag beetle lengths. And lastly, line plots do not have a vertical axis. They only have a horizontal axis. So in this example, we're going to be looking at a set of data and then completing a line plot together. So Mrs. Welch surveyed her students about how much they had grown over the past year. This is the data she gathered. Students' growth over the past year to the nearest half inch. So if we take a look at our table, we have all of the data points that are listed. So those are, as she was surveying her students, those were the measurements that came out of the survey. So as we're beginning to create our line plot, the first thing you want to do is you want to identify the smallest data point and the largest data point, because that's going to help us fill in the units in order on our horizontal axis. So as I was looking through this, I noticed that the smallest data point was half, and the largest data point was 3.5. So I know that half is going to be on this side of my line plot, and 3.5 is going to be on this side of my line plot. Okay. Now, another important thing is that in the table it says to the nearest half inch. Now, this is going to tell me how I need to scale my units that are being reported. In other words, if we're starting at half, the next half inch would be 1, then 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, and lastly 3.5. That's going to tell us the scale in which the numbers are going up. Okay, so fill in the units being reported and then label what those numbers are representing. So in this case, those numbers are representing the growth in inches. Once you have your horizontal axis labeled, you can also then go ahead and create a title for your graph. So the title for our graph is going to be Student Growth over 1 year. Okay, and that title just describes the data set that we will be plotting. Okay. Now, when you are plotting data points, in order to ensure that you do not miss any or that you don't plot 2 points twice, what you are going to do is you're going to plot the point, and then you're going to cross it out. So we're going to start, we're just going to go down the first column, and then I'm going to go down the second column. I'm not going to show you all of them, but I will show you a few just so you can understand kind of the routine in plotting data points to ensure that you're doing it accurately. So my first data point is 1.5. Remember, line plots use x's. So I'm going to go ahead and plot 1.5. And then in the table, I'm actually going to cross off that data point. So I know that it's plotted, and I know that I do not need to plot it again. The next data point is 2. So I'm going to plot that data point. And then I'm going to go ahead and cross off that data point. The next one is 2.5. Plot the data point. Cross off the data point. Then we have 1/2. We are going to plot the data point and then cross off the data point. You're going to continue to do this until all of the data points are plotted. Okay. So your final line plot for this set of data would look something like this. Okay. So the x's, or the data points, represent the number of students that grew that amount in 1 year. So, for example, we had 3 students in Mrs. Welch's class that grew 1/2 inch in 1 year, right? We had 1 student that grew 3.5 inches in 1 year. We had 4 students that grew 1 inch in 1 year. Now, the measurements, as we mentioned before, on the horizontal axis, represent how much they grew in 1 year. Okay, so it's important that you are understanding your line plot before you move forward to answer some questions about it. Okay, so we have 2 questions that we're going to answer today. The first one says, what is the greatest number of inches a student grew in 1 year? Now, it's important to read these questions carefully. This one's asking the greatest number, whoops, didn't mean to cross that out, greatest number of inches a student grew in 1 year, okay? In other words, what is the greatest value that's reported on your horizontal axis? So the greatest number would be 3.5 inches. And then it says the least, the least amount that the student grew in a year was 1/2 inch. The next question says, what is the difference between the greatest and the least number of inches grown? So if our greatest number of inches grown is 3.5 and the least is 1/2, to find the difference between the two, we are actually just going to subtract the 2 values. And when you do 3.5 minus 1/2, you get 3. Our number model with our unknown would look like this. We would have 3.5 minus 1/2 equals D. And our answer is 3 inches. Okay. So today you will be completing an assignment on ClassKick. You will be creating a line plot and answering some questions about the line plot that is created.